Well, this is Joe Markowitz with my friend Chris Harris, Executive Director of Unhyphenated America, and myself, creator and founder of Defender Gear. Glad to be able to share with you all today, Chris.
So
glad to have you down here in our home, actually, in this time of stay-at-home orders and quarantines, and you covertly came in the middle of the night, snuck in here.
Had a little bit of rebellion right there,
Yeah, you made it anyway. We're excited about this next section here of our vlog. We're gonna get into I think very relevant current events. We get a chance to just jam a little bit, dialogue a little bit about topics in and around what is very near and dear to our hearts, and that is the greatness of America, our founding fathers, the principles that established this country, the blessings of liberty and freedom, but also the risks and the attacks against our freedoms and liberty. And we're very passionate about these things. My friend Chris here, as Executive Director of Unhyphenated America, I think going on at least 10 years now, from the DC area. He's an entrepreneur, also does a lot of work in the tech industry, but what he also is really motivated by and what he's very active in right now is, from his perspective, educating people about not only the way they think and believe, but also from time to time will go up against some people that disagree with him significantly in political arenas. We'll touch upon that. We'll let him go over his background a little bit, what he's passionate about. For me, myself, over 3 decades as a business owner, I own multiple companies, and my passion to start Defender Gear was far beyond just having an apparel company, which I think we've got some really cool stuff, and it really echoes my passion and the message of freedom and liberty, and that this is worth defending and fighting for. But beyond that, the platform is about educating people on the origins of their freedom, what makes America different, what makes America special, what makes America exceptional. Far from being perfect, far from being free from blemishes and times in our history where very dark times, but overall, what's the alternative? What's the alternative? And I wouldn't want to live anywhere else other than America. We're grateful for our heritage. We're grateful for the men and women who have paid a great price so that you and I may enjoy the freedoms and our rights that we enjoy today. So the other thing I want to share with you is this, in all of my my writings, my blogs, our vlogs, social media, and everything in between, is that I endeavor to stay above the political arm wrestling. I want to stay away from that. I believe that our message is higher than political parties. While I may address the ideology of certain politicians or political parties and challenge that thinking and that belief system, I still want to stay above it. I challenge it because I believe that ideology maybe or some of their political positions are contrary to what the fundamentals of America is. And what freedom and liberty is all about. And so I'll challenge it. And by the way, I will freely challenge anybody of any political party, right, left, middle, extremes, whatever. I will challenge that because in the end, we are all Americans. Which is a great segue to my friend Chris here, who I've known about Chris for about 3 or 4 years. You started following me over on Defender Gear. I said, who is this guy, Chris Harris, Unhyphenated America? So I started getting into his a little bit of his background and seeing what what he believes in, and he's also, you might recognize him, he's also been on Fox News, CNN, and many other media outlets. He is active politically, but he's kind of like me, that he wants to stay above the fray. He wants to speak in the realm of ideas, of principles, and I just think that makes a much better dialogue and conversation. I've never seen Chris get in an argument with anybody where all it is shouting. I believe that doesn't really help us intellectually. Unfortunately, a lot of people, they don't want to dialogue. They don't want to have an argument, make an argument. If somebody disagrees with me politically, I say, sure, I respect the fact that you believe the way you believe, but let's have a conversation. Make an argument for what you believe. And unfortunately, sometimes it ends up in just name calling, which is never a conversation starter. Being called a racist or a homophobe or xenophobe or all the phobes and all the names, that's just intellectual poverty in my mind. Let's make an argument. That's what Americans should be. We should be able to agree to disagree. The American political system, even our founding fathers, there was great disagreement upon to move towards the Declaration, which is an act of treason. The very act of treason that by putting your name on that declaration, those 56 signers, they knew exactly the risk. They had pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor on this principle that man should not live under tyranny. The very principles of freedom and liberty are something worth fighting for, and they believed it so deeply, so passionately, that they were willing to give up their honor, their names, their fortunes, even their very lives. And many of those signers did, Chris. They did end up giving their lives or die in prison. They lost their families. Many of them lost all their properties, their businesses, their names. They really gave up an awful lot. We believe that. I have some famous quotes that I want to be able to share in this conversation here today. But getting back to the disagreements, that there was, even in those in that summer of 1775 and 1776, those heated arguments that extended for months and months. And this was already, while the colonists were already shedding blood against the most powerful military in the world. That the shot heard round the world really began things, and there was a lot of blood spilled already. By the time these delegates gathered, represented 13 colonies in Philadelphia. And so there was a lot of disagreement over how far they wanted to go. What words matter.
Yes, they do.
And in that declaration, and once they put their signature, starting right at the top, big and bold, John Hancock, and they put their signature on that document, that is an act of treason. And surely we'll either hang separately or we'll hang together. I mean, there's a lot of reflection on the fact that how solemn that occasion was, but how determined they were based upon what they believed. Our Constitution, 1787, it was the years following the Revolution. Already we had won the revolution against the most powerful military and government in the world. We had won our freedom, our independence. But already, as we got into 1785, 86, 87, in 88 and 89, there was already a lot of contention between the states about states' rights versus federalism. And I don't want to go down that path, but there was a lot of disagreement in this time. Disagreement is good. Intellectual discussions, even contentious arguments, make a case. I wish people today would really take that course. When they disagree with somebody, we'll make an argument. Have an adult conversation. You feel strongly about something, make your case. You don't have to resort towards name calling, threats, burning down a campus, hurting people or threatening people. You don't have to resort to that. Those are all conversation enders. We should engage in intellectual dialogue and even differences that lead to arguments, but arguments not based upon name calling or personal attacks. This makes us better when we engage in these conversations to make our society better, to really think about the higher calling. And like I said, it's a perfect segue. Chris and I, while I've known about Chris for a few years, he's known about me and probably knew me a lot better than I knew Chris for about 10, 12 plus years. Me as an entrepreneur, Chris and his background, where he came from, we came together because of some common beliefs and principles. But this man right here, with Unhyphenated America, has, it's pretty common that he'll get threats, he'll be attacked for his beliefs, he'll be attacked because he has the courage to be able to talk about the things that really matter. And he'll go against certain belief systems that are all about victimhood, control, even, may I say, socialism, yes, government overreach. He will challenge that on the basis of our principles of liberty and freedom. I'm going to let Chris kind of take it away from here and tell us about yourself and talk about the stand that you're taking, the courage that you've had to have, and sometimes the risk of you being black as a conservative who's a Christian, and you're very bold about your beliefs and not afraid to challenge people. So, Chris, take it away.
Thanks, sir. I appreciate that. Once again, I'm Christopher Harris, the Executive Director of Unhyphenated America. And people always ask me, well, what does that mean? What does your organization mean, Chris? And I say, well, it's really simple that we understand, we embrace the beliefs of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And as we tell people, when you embrace those beliefs, those foundational beliefs this country was founded on, as Joe's talked about, is that, then you're an American, and that there's no need for any prefix or suffix. You're just an American. And it's really the only place in the world that is not an entirely homogenous nation that allows you to become a member, to become a citizen without really having to have been of a particular ethnic group. And it's something that's unique to be protected and preserved, to defend it, if you will, is one of the reasons why I'm such a big fan of what Joe is doing with Defender gear. But yes, I've received threats from people. I've had people mail things to my home, sometimes a little passive aggressive, but of course I've gotten emails. I've had all these people come at me and they've made threats to my family. There's always a threat to my livelihood. And the simple reason is why, as Joe said, is because I'm taking a stance against what's now become conventional thinking, is that you're supposed to be a subject to the government. I wholeheartedly refute that. But one of the things I like to do is to have a conversation with people. I mean, I'm not a confrontational person, and I'm more concerned with how you think. And I ask you, what do you think? But I really want to know how you think. How did you come to that conclusion? And it's interesting because asking people that question seems to, you would think that I'm attacking someone simply by asking them that question. Well, what do you think, and how did you come to that conclusion? They will call it the Socratic method, to ask people that question. I always want to know, well, what's your end goal? See, we can have a conversation, we can have disagreements, and as the founders and framers did, mainly because their core desire was to have liberty. How to go about doing it? No, we can argue all day long about how to increase liberty, excuse me, but the goal is liberty. I always want to know from people, well, is your end goal liberty? If not, then we really need to talk about this. What does liberty even mean to you? What's the difference between freedom and liberty? Do you understand that there is a difference between freedom and liberty? And I look at myself more as someone who likes to educate and inform people. But I've come to realize that we can't even have a debate until we first define terms. And we can talk about what's going on in America today. And one of my hot topics I love to talk about is the subject of socialism. And there's a lot of people who think that socialism, and you see those man on the street interviews, and they'll go out there and stick a camera, hey, what do you think about socialism? And there's a lot of people, mainly in younger generations, who think that socialism simply means to be sociable. And it's like there's nothing further from the truth.
Or fairness. It's all about fairness, right?
Yeah.
And it's fair that it's unfair for some people to have more than others. You're unloving, you're hateful if you're not looking out for your fellow American.
Absolutely.
Is that right?
Oh, that's exactly what people think, and then of course you have people who do. One of the things that we talk about with Unhyphenated America is that we fight against identity politics. There's a group of people out there who seek to separate people based on check boxes, and there's setting male against female, setting black against white, older against younger, rich against poor. And the only reason they're doing that is because they know if there's that contention that will allow them to gain more power. But when you realize that, first of all, as the founders and framers talked about, is that we were all created equal. Created equal does not mean that you will have equal outcomes. There's a lot of people who begin with this faulty premise that you're supposed to have these equal outcomes. No, you have equal intrinsic value in the eyes of your creator. That God does not view me as less than Joe because I'm black, and he does not view me as greater than Joe because I'm black. There's people, it's interesting, there's black people who, there's a narrative out there among a lot of black people that there's something inherently superior about black people. And there's people who believe that white people are inherently inferior or evil or whatever. And I'm like, okay, let's talk about truth. Let's talk about what are the definitions of words. How did you come to that conclusion? I just had a young lady on my Facebook page get into an argument with me, and then she ended up blocking me. She made the statement, Joe, that, she used some profanity, but she basically said that white people don't trust her, they don't believe in anything that doesn't support them, that is not in their interest. And I asked her the question, well, that's interesting, where'd you get that from? And she ended up talking about COVID-19 eventually, and she was saying, oh, well, it's COVID-19 is killing more blacks. It's largely the majority of the people dying from COVID-19 were black. And I'm like, well, that's not actual truth. See, we got to get into truth. The numbers say differently. There's a difference, and this is where definitions come in. There's a difference between something being a larger proportion versus being a majority. The majority of people dying from COVID-19 are not black. There might be a higher percentage, a higher proportion of black people dying from COVID-19, but then we can get down and say, okay, well, why do you come to this conclusion? Why do you think this is? There are things that we all know, that there are lifestyle choices that people have that lead to them being more prone to being affected by certain illnesses. Where did that come from? That's culture.
If I may, and hold that thought, it has a lot to do with having, because your belief system already predetermined outcomes that you now are looking for inputs to validate those outcomes. Well, COVID-19 kills more black people. Therefore, it's the white guy's fault, right? They want it, there's more poverty. Well, why is that? It's because of inequity, or it's unfair, or hate, or racism, or whatever. Finding arguments to back up your predetermined worldview that you won't change unless your belief system change.
Well, in every economic fallacy, begins with a faulty premise, right? It begins with the idea that there's only one pie and it's only so big, and therefore, if Joe happens to have, I mean, I always go back to like an example when you were kids growing up. Maybe it was pizza night, right? Mom, dad ordered a pizza. You had, it's a family of four, and maybe you're the youngest. Your older sibling got, 2.5 slices of pizza and you didn't. Well, there's a finite amount of pizza. They got a bigger piece, therefore you were deprived of it. And this is the mindset that a lot of people carry going forward. They think that the pie is only so big, and therefore if someone else has more than they do, then that's unfair. And then they also begin to take that and attribute that to certain things like race. And they say, oh, well, it's unfair that certain people, certain ethnic groups have more. And once again, they're going back with this bias that they've been taught that, well, I'm poor because I'm black and because my family were slaves. And one of my favorite things to do is talk to people and ask them, like, well, do you know about what happened like in the previous 100 years? Like, we've been, my family, like I said, I am, it's documented, I am the descendant of slaves. My 3 times great grandfather was born on a plantation in Virginia in 1813. He was able to actually purchase his freedom. But then what you have is, after 1865, emancipation, everything like that, what a lot of people don't realize, Joe, is that 50-year period from 1865 to 1915, that black people actually prospered. Was there Jim Crow? Of course. There were obstacles that were put in place. But believe it or not, black people went from basically about a 10% literacy rate to about a 40 to 50% literacy rate, which is incredible considering the fact that previously you were not even allowed to learn how to read. And one of the questions I always ask, well, why did they not want you to learn how to read? One of the books there, obviously, the book that most everyone had was they had the Holy Bible. Well, if you read the Holy Bible, and you comprehended what was in there, you begin to realize that you had an intrinsic value in the eyes of your Creator.
Right.
And if you have that understanding, then you'll stand against those who try to control you.
That's exactly right.
And this is one of the things they didn't want to talk about. And the people, as black people began to embrace that period from 1865 to 1915, we went from basically, owning nothing. And here's a little tidbit people don't realize. By 1910, 1915, there were about 10 million black people in the country, where there was about 4.5 million black people in the United States in 1860 census. And by the way, about 10% of them were free blacks. Did anybody ever tell you that? That's not part of the curriculum that they teach you. Why are they not teaching you that curriculum? Because they want you to believe that everybody was a slave. But then you realize 50 years after that, at the height of Jim Crow, black people went from owning nothing to owning 20 million acres of land. Now that's just a huge number. It's totally, they don't understand it. But here, let me give you some context. 20 million acres of land is the equivalent of owning the entire state of South Carolina plus Rhode Island and a little bit left over. That's what we went from. And how do we do that? By embracing the foundational principles: life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. We embrace capitalism and free enterprise. And that's why we had that success. And that success continued despite the barriers of racism, despite Jim Crow. That success continued for another 50 years from 1915 to 1965. And we continue to grow. Black people were prospering by embracing foundational principles, embracing that truth. But it was only after that point when we decided to, and there's a whole nother discussion about how we ended up there, but we decided to embrace a victim mindset. And what you've seen is a massive decline. The first thing that the victim mindset says that, you're black, you're in America, they hate you because you're black, you'll never be able to succeed, which was crazy that we embraced that mindset considering the fact that we actually saw the success. I was talking to my family, my parents, my aunts and uncles. They all grew up in Detroit. If you had seen or understood what Detroit was like in the 50s and 60s, there was a lot of prosperity. Everybody, more or less, grew up with a mother and father in the home. And I've had this conversation with my parents, my aunts and uncles. I said, why is it that you have allowed this narrative to be put forward that broken homes is the legacy of slavery? Why has that been pushed? It's not. It's not. That is the legacy of big government. When we decided to turn away from God, to turn away from foundational principles, to embrace these ideas that government will take care of you, that's what led to the decline, the degradation of the family, and everything else happened after that. This victim mindset that we have was cultivated. It didn't happen overnight. It takes a little while for it to happen, but when we started embracing that, everything went downhill from there. But I wasn't raised in that mindset, Joe. But I decided, it's funny, I started getting more around the culture, and people started telling me, well, Chris, things are not going right in your life right now. You know why? It's because of the evil white man. And because I was a little down on myself, I started to embrace that. Mm-hmm. And it was one of the darkest periods in my life. But one of the biggest things is that when I said, that's not how you were raised. You weren't raised to see yourself as a victim. And everything changed. Everything got better in my life when I said, no, I am actually able to control my actions by, one, changing what I put in my brain, changing my associations, and everything in my life has gotten better as a result of that. And everybody I know who's done the same thing has had the same results. It's all very predictable.
So you push against and challenge the mindset that you are stuck in life.
Absolutely.
Based upon your skin color. You challenge that because you have not only an identity as a believer.
Absolutely.
Because God does not see us as different or better or worse than another human being. 2 is that our declaration, even back our founders declared this, that they believe that all men are created equal. It goes without saying that it certainly didn't play out properly over the next 50, 60, 80 years, 90 years, and obviously the result of that and almost a judgment on this country was the Civil War, without a doubt. And it was a very painful time. But the fact is, getting back to when you ask questions, people who challenge you, maybe even say ugly things about you, try to paint you back into the collective. You're supposed to vote with us. You're supposed to believe with us. Come on. When you ask them questions like this, what do you want? Let's talk about economically. Mm-hmm. All right. Have you ever asked them economically, what do you want? What do they tend to go there with that? Well, somebody owes me something. Am I right? It's been unfair, so the government needs to give it to me. I need to be given more. Or, what if they said, I would like the ability to earn more? Be given more or earn more? I want you to talk about this. One has a lot to do with the dignity of mankind and really capitalism. Mm-hmm. B is you're trusting somebody else for your well-being, your livelihood, your family's economic future, and you have turned over control of your life to someone else, a collective, a government, or somebody that says, I will take care of you. One is all about human dignity. Another one is about dependency. Talk about that.
So I'm a big history fan, and those who know me and follow me know that I can hardly do an interview without mentioning a hero, my mentor from afar or from history, somebody I refer to as that dude, Booker T. Washington. And just to give you an idea, Booker T. Washington was born as a slave in 1856, right? He was emancipated like all the other slaves in 1965.
1865.
1865, thank you.
Yep.
In 1865, he was emancipated like all the other slaves. But by 1895, until he passed away in 1915, he was without a doubt the most influential black man in America, and actually the most influential black man in the world. And here was his whole thing, was talking about helping black people to come up from slavery. The core message that he was telling people was like, listen, for generations now, you have been worked, right? Because there are people, obviously, listen, when you've come from slavery, when you had people beating you, whipping you, and so on and so forth, you begin to look at work as a punishment. But the thing that Booker T said was like, listen, you have been worked like a beast of burden. Now it's time for you to learn how to work like a man, and that there's dignity in working like a man. And you know what it is what makes a slave? A slave is someone who does not own the fruits of their labor. That's what we did for 200 plus years. My ancestors were worked like beasts of burden, and they did not get to keep any of the fruits of their labor. All of a sudden now you're free. No one else is responsible for providing for you, even though when they provided for you, they really only gave you scraps. They're not responsible for providing for you now, but they're also not limiting what you can earn. And what ended up happening is that people realized, they embraced that. Next thing you know, you had this huge explosion in wealth, because that's where it comes from. It comes from your own work, owning your own work. And I ask people that today. It's like, how'd you like to, even let's talk about taxes. I ask people, hey, how would you feel about being able to keep your entire paycheck? Oh man, that would be great. I like to talk about those principal things because regardless of what your political affiliation is, I have not met a single person yet who has not said, man, it'd be great to keep my entire paycheck. So then we begin to ask the question, well, why are you getting so much of your paycheck taken? Well, it's because, the government needs it. Well, do they really need it? Do they need as much? And you start asking these questions. I like to take people down this path because what I've learned is that I can't go and tell you what to think. In fact, when I do that, you're going to reject it. All I can do is help you to discover it within yourself and just asking a few pointed questions. Why do you think this way? How did you end up here? When you got your first job, my first job, I was 14 years old and nobody told me about taxes, right? I think I was making $2.95 an hour or whatever like that. You worked 60 hours or whatever. You're expecting a paycheck, let's say $3 an hour times 60 hours. You're expecting a check for $180 and you end up getting a check for $150 and you're like, where's my money? Because you're doing the basic math. You ask yourself, so why was this taken away? And the difference between an employee versus an entrepreneur, and I always point this out to people, is that when you're an employee, you actually have your taxes auto-debited. Entrepreneurs have to pay taxes. And if you had to write out that check to government,
twice as much
yes,
versus an employee.
Twice as much.
That's right.
And if you had to write out a check, and it's interesting, when you become an entrepreneur and you have to write a check to government, you start asking yourself, man, they tell me that, well, we need government to fix the roads. But when you're out there driving and you see this, I keep hitting the same pothole on the same street. Why am I paying this money for taxes when this same pothole's been there for X amount of time? You start to ask questions about they say we're supposed to be paying these taxes to sustain the public education system. And then you sit there and go, well, these kids are not really getting any smarter. And you begin to question those things. They don't want us to question those things. They really don't want you to question those things because they don't have answers. There's a great quote from Thomas Sowell, somebody I admire greatly, an economist. And he said that much of the social history, he said this years ago, so he said much of the social history of the past 30 years has been replacing what works with what sounds good. My background actually is in the IT field. So I've been taught to think analytically, ask if-then statements. People will call, hey, can you fix my computer? Well, I already know there's only a handful of reasons why your computer's not working. Let's start with, is it plugged in? Let's start with those questions. And we realize that if we ask these questions, we follow some critical thinking, that we're going to find the solution. So I apply that same thought process. And I got to go back. I remember taking math in school, and I remember the teacher dinged me on a math test because I didn't show my work. And I was like, but I got the right answer. She's like, no, Chris, you have to show your work. And I was like, I got the right answer. What does it matter? And now in hindsight, I wish I could go back and talk to her and say, I appreciate you challenging me and making me show my work, because I might have got the right answer there, but that was kind of luck. You need to show your work so I can find out how you think. How did you arrive to this answer? And if you don't have the right thought process, and there is a proper thought process, there is objective truth out there, and truth is something that's outside of bias. It's demonstrable. It's using a scientific method to be able to determine how you got to this particular truth. When you do that, you'll more consistently get the right answer. But it begins with knowing how to think, knowing that there is truth, and that you can get to a particular result. And this is where I come back and I talk to the average black person. What do you want? As you ask, what do you want? Do you want a nice home? Do you want your kids to have a better education, so on and so forth? If that's what you want, how do you suppose you're going to get to that? And I let them tell me. And I said, okay, well, do you know someone who has achieved that? If they've achieved it and they follow this path, it's kind of like going through a landmine, right? A minefield. Probably it's in your best to follow that same path of success. And those, whether you're black, white, green, yellow, purple, doesn't really matter. You could have polka dots. There's objective truth. There's a path that you can follow that is no respecter of persons, that greatly increases the probability, and like there's no absolutes, right? It's not an absolute in that regards, but it greatly increases the probability and likelihood of you being successful. And it doesn't care about your ethnicity, doesn't care about your gender, doesn't care about any of those things. And that's one of the beauty of America. The beauty of America is that you can follow that success path and you can get the results. And nobody can take it away from you unless you vote for government who has a monopoly on force to take it away from you.
So you're up against forces, belief systems, ideologies that, whether they know it or not, are promoting dependency.
Absolutely.
And dependency is rooted in victimhood, is rooted in poverty, and you're dependent on your future and your livelihood based upon somebody else because you just don't know. But in your personal life, you have taught yourself and you've been around people that have taught you the principle of self-determination. Big difference between dependency and self-determination. Now you ascribe to a belief that says through a capitalism or through capitalism or free enterprise, about limited government, is that you don't have to depend on someone else to advance your life personally, professionally, economically. Your quality of life can be elevated based upon your effort, your time, your sacrifice. You should be rewarded for your effort. Now that is rooted in a belief that talks about self-determination as opposed to dependency. And to me, there's nothing in between.
Yes.
It's kind of like people would say, well, the government does need to provide some things. Yes, they do. And that is limited by the United States Constitution. However, in this crisis we're in right now with COVID-19, we're seeing firsthand how powerful the government can be. The federal government, state government, and even local municipalities have for the sake of safety, really made us extremely dependent. And for the first time in my lifetime, I am seeing where this is what socialism could look like. Now, let me pause right there because I'm really diving into something. You must say, here you guys go again. All right, we're going to talk about it. The government, be it local, state, federal, there are certain emergency powers given to the government outlined in the Constitution, state constitution, local governments. We acknowledge that. We acknowledge the fact that with COVID-19, this is dangerous, but just in perspective, in the 2018-2019 flu season, there was over 61,000 people in this country who died because of the flu season. How many schools were closed in that time? How many athletic events were closed? How many seasons were canceled? How many graduations were canceled? How many private businesses were shut down in that time? Just for perspective, because we're teeing each other up for something that we're going to talk about here. But the government does have limited powers, emergency powers in certain times. We all acknowledge that. However, we're seeing firsthand where these are just not temporary emergency powers. I personally believe that we're seeing a test run. That there is statists or progressives who believe. I almost think it's like a socialist dream right now. That believe that, okay, we now see how quick we can gain control over American society, over the economic system, business. There's subjectivity in essential versus non-essential. We're seeing some pretty radical stuff here, which I'm very concerned about. We're going to talk about, but the concept of dependency versus self-determination, very important contrast. I don't see anything in between, and it all has to do with the way you believe, your belief system. And by the way, have you ever gotten an argument with someone who they were convinced that America is bad, or they're ticked off because you speak about the goodness of America or American exceptionalism? You ever had those kind of arguments?
All the time. And I ask people the question, and once again I got to go back to Thomas Sowell. He said there's an old economist joke, when somebody says, "How you doing?" he says, "Compared to what?" And I always ask people that question. When you say America's bad, compared to what? What country are you comparing America to? Because, what most people do is they compare America to utopia. And utopia is nowhere. That's actually what the definition of utopia is. It's nowhere. So when you tell me America's bad, I always, let's just look at the facts. That this is a nation that accepts people from all over the world. Our entry is pretty much wide open. There's people coming here all the time. There's people risking their lives to come here. And I always say, listen, I'll believe that America's bad when I see a mass exodus. When I see as many people trying to leave the country as are trying to come here. That's when I'll say, maybe America might be kind of bad. But nobody's leaving. How
many people are running to China right now? That is way better. They're going to China. How many people are running to Russia?
Well, what's interesting about that, Joe, is like when you look at my background, once again, I grew up overseas in Germany in the Cold War. I got a chance to see what socialism was like. My family, we took the train from Frankfurt, Germany to Berlin, and was really interesting when we got to the... Sorry. What's really interesting is when we got to the East German border, going to Berlin, the train stopped and the East German border guards came on and they looked around to give a real cursory glance, right? But then as the train was transitioning, we went through East Germany, and then when we were transitioning from East Berlin to West Berlin, that's when they brought in this whole platoon of border guards, and they looked under every nook and cranny. They had the big German shepherds and machine guns, and they did all that. And I had to ask myself, well, why is that? Why were they so concerned about people leaving the socialist paradise of East Germany? Remember, the government was providing for you. And no one was homeless in East Germany, right?
Did they have health care?
Yeah, they had health care. No one was homeless. The state took care of education, all that. You couldn't find toilet paper, kind of like what we're doing now, right? Or you had to stand in line forever to get toilet paper. But that's what was there. The same thing was there was a line of people trying to leave mainland China to get to Hong Kong. And people would look in places like Hong Kong and say, yeah, but they're living on boats, they're living in what seems like poverty. And they're like, yeah, but you don't know what I left from. And they're sitting there going, this is better. The opportunity here, at least I have a shot. I might be living on a raft here in Hong Kong harbor, but I'm not going to stay here. That's only available in places like the United States of America. We have that option. But is America bad? Well, who's good? Who are you comparing it to? What's your perception of perfection? And I always ask people a simple question. If you know that there's a perfect place out there and you see these things are like, the freest places in the world to live, and they usually use some Scandinavian countries, but there's only a couple of flights a day from the United States to Denmark, right? It's not like there's daily flights leaving, hundreds of flights. Nobody's going to Denmark from the United States of America. That people vote with their wallets and with their feet. If there is better, and people know there's better, they will go seek better. People have sought better. They come here to the United States.
Let me ask you this. If they vote with their wallets, how come there's certain cities in the United States of America that is run by one political party for generations, and how come the residents, how come they don't say enough is enough? It isn't working. How come it keeps perpetuating one generation to the next? And I'm sorry to be naive here. It's really a stretch for me. Why is it, if they vote for wallets, how come they keep voting for dependency generation after generation, or election after election, generation after? Why is that?
Well, the reality is there are people who are content with being given scraps. I mean, it's just the reality that we're not all the same. Some people want more, and some people are very comfortable with just being able to get by because they don't have to put forth the extra effort. That's where many of those people are, and they're still thinking, hey, as long as a check is coming in and I don't have to go out there and work to go get it, they're content with that. But what you'll see is a lot of the people who want more, and they realize that things are not great in their neighborhood, so they'll leave. The problem I have, and this is where I had these conversations with other black people, especially those who are middle class, I always ask them that question. It's like, listen, you left the hood because things were terrible. Why were things terrible? What was the public policy there? Have you ever stopped to think that the people who are running Detroit, Baltimore, you name the city, these people all have a certain thought process. They all have, they all vote a particular way. You left Detroit, like my family left Detroit, because my parents, well, my dad he realized he needed to get his family out of Detroit after my mom got robbed and beaten coming home from work late one night. She was doing taxes for H&R Block, and some guy was waiting in the apartment hallway, jumped her, beat her up, and to take her purse. And at that point, my dad said, that's it, we're done, we're getting out of here. And that was also part of the impetus behind him joining the military. But they realized that there are, it's an if-then statement. There's actions and there's results. What I'm finding is that a lot of people, they're not doing the connection. They're not connecting the dots and realizing that these results are because of these actions.
And let's talk about that connecting. I don't know of a single mom or dad, both, that deep down inside wouldn't want a better life for their children. It just built into us. There's a protection a mechanism just built in our very DNA. You are going to protect your children, keep them safe. You'll even lay your own life on the line for your children. No doubt about it. But I've never met, in all my 30 plus years of being in business for myself, have I ever met anybody, it didn't matter their walk of life, their background, their skin color, age, college educated, not educated. I've never met one that if you really ask them about this, who wouldn't want a better life for their children.
But what education is the silver bullet.
That's the connection.
It's education. That's one of the things I like to inform and educate people. School choice, right? Let's talk about school choice. And in the black community, because one of the things that Unhyphenated America did is we've done some polling in a lot of major cities. And I did a TV appearance over the Thanksgiving, Black Friday weekend, the day after Thanksgiving. And I was talking about things like criminal justice reform because we did some polling and we found that there was a large percentage of black people who were actually in favor of criminal justice reform. That's what I was talking about at that moment, but that has not been the key issue that a lot of black folks are interested in. It's school choice. And I always ask people, it's like, okay, so you want your kids to have an opportunity to get a better education. Why? Because you realize that having a better education opens up doors for you so that you can transcend whatever socioeconomic background you come from. So I always ask the question, is like, so if you know that this is the key, if school choice is the key, and you want that, who's against it? And you pause. Because I'm not going to sit there and tell you, oh, it's this party. No, I just want you to say, who stands against it?
Can I say NEA?
Well, them too, right?
Okay, but keep going.
Yeah. So you have, and there's parties and there's people that support those parties who stand against it. And you have to ask yourself, so do these people have your best interest at heart? Why would you continue to vote for them if we've seen the results? 50 plus years of trusting those people with supposedly empowering you, But really what they're trying to do is they're trying to give you a fish. They're not trying to teach you how to fish. They're trying to give you a fish because they want you to be dependent upon them. But see, like one of my buddies said, he says, you have to ask the question, well, first of all, why do I need you to even teach me how to fish? A hungry person, if they have access to water, they'll figure out how to get that fish. So here's the question, do you own the waters? And then you start asking yourself, it's like there's people, there's political parties, there's groups of people who they want to control access to the water.
So you've got, there is a guarantee of outcomes, and then or there's a guarantee of opportunity. An entrepreneur embraces not free stuff, but an opportunity.
Yes.
If you haven't been educated, if you've never been told, if you've never been shown that there's a better way, you just want guaranteed outcomes. Mm-hmm. It's survival, it's self-preservation. But when you learn about really our economic system, the free enterprise system, when you learn about really what our founders fought for so hard and sacrificed so much, so that while it's the pursuit of happiness. It's one of those inalienable rights, pursuit of happiness as opposed to happiness. We can't guarantee, no one can guarantee happiness for everyone. It's impossible. But if you can guarantee the opportunity to pursue your own happiness and define your success on your own terms and what your future could be like, you now are free to pursue that. There are, and this is not just pie in the sky stuff, there are certain politicians who have made some very common sense proposals like opportunity zones in the inner cities that I think has great merit, because I think it brings hope. If we're to invest in anything, rather than keep pumping money into keeping people the same, why don't you invest in an opportunity zone? Why don't you invest in school choice? Why don't you give mom or dad or both the chance to decide how their children can be educated? Why is it that time and time again, when there's some really innovative entrepreneurs who want to open up charter schools or private schools or promote homeschooling, why is it that whether it be the NEA or city and local or state governments push back against that? It's unfair. That means only certain people, the privileged, will get access to the best stuff. That's an acknowledgement that what they're currently doing is working. Why is it, Chris, that we aren't promoting the chance that someone can now design their own future and try to create a better life for their children and their children's children?
So the interesting thing about that is I'm such a big history buff. I realize that other people have already asked these questions and figured out. Like, so once again, my hero, Booker T. Washington, talked about this. This man died in 1915. But one of the things he talked about, he says, there are people who have a vested interest in you staying in poverty. And when I read that, I was like, wow, he was talking about this in 1915. You know, that this is a truth that's been there for over 100 years. This is not something new. But also one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this, and that even though sometimes I feel like I'm hitting my head against a brick wall, I realize that people have applied these truths, these principles, and been successful before. That if black people went from slavery to prosperity within 50 years, we can do it again because they follow these principles. And so it's a little bit more insidious now, because before they were held, my ancestors were held in physical bondage. Now it's been more of a mental, emotional bondage, right? Is that you can hold a man in bondage and he's pretty much always going to desire to be free, but when you can convince him to put the chains on himself, he'll stay there. And that's one of the things that's happened, especially within the black community, and it's happening overall. I've always said that the black community is the canary in the coal mine for America overall. These policies that they pushed You start seeing the results, and they're starting to happen more out. I mean, when you start incentivizing having children out of wedlock. Well, it was a big deal, or it wasn't such a big deal when it was only infecting the black community, right? But now we're seeing that out of wedlock births have exploded among all ethnic groups. And then you start seeing that, okay, well, that also leads to a culture of poverty. That children who were born and raised in single parent households, while it's not an absolute, it's not like your life is over because you were born and raised in a single parent household, but the reality is it does increase the probability and likelihood that you'll be in poverty, that you'll be in crime and all those things. And you start realizing this, and you have to explain this to people that it's the if then, it's the connecting the dots. This is how you got here. We can talk about the fact that in 1965, the out of wedlock birth rate in the black community was only about 23%. Daniel Patrick, Senator, well, soon to be Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan from New York, actually talked about that. But then you fast forward to 1986, the out of wedlock birth rate in the black community went from 23% in 1965 to 50+% in one generation. Another generation later, it's at over 70%. These are all things that we know lead to more dependency, more crime, all those things. And people want more, they want better, but because they're constantly having this message hammered on them, they're not kind of realizing how we got here. They're obscuring how you got there. The education system is not teaching how you got there. The education system is not teaching you what used to be. They want you to think that this is just how life always is. And they also want to help to promote that idea of the victimhood and to say, well, the only reason why you're here stuck in poverty is because, Joe or Chris or whoever has so much. So you know what? Vote for me and I'll help to make it more fair. When the reality is people like you and I are simply saying to people like, listen, there's an ocean out there. It's filled with water. The ocean filled with fish. And I'll tell you what, I'm not going to do anything to obstruct you going out there, but I'll also help show you how to feed. And you're not going to be limited to one type of fish. You can have there's thousands of different type of fish. You can have whatever kind of fish you want. This is a message that conservatives teach, is the idea that you can have, there's not only one pie, it's not only so big. You can have cherry pie, you can have pumpkin pie, you can have sweet potato pie. There's all the different kind of pies you want because there's actually a kitchen out there where you can bake whatever type of pie you want to bake. And government is trying to suppress that, and we're seeing it with this current crisis, right? With COVID-19.
Let's talk about that. So here it is. You've got this virus that has now in the United States has killed tens of thousands, and every day it does go on up. But think about this. That people are being stopped on the street for leaving their homes. That somebody that spreads rumors that it isn't real, or whistleblowers that want to actually tell the truth about things are being arrested or asking questions, that industries, factories, small businesses are being closed, shut down, that egress and ingress to in and out of cities forbidden, can't travel, nobody can travel into a city or leave that city at all. It's prohibited. That these things are, you might be thinking, well, that's happening in China. Of course they throw the whistleblowers into jail. They arrest people on the streets. People disappear. Entire businesses are closed. Transportation in and out of cities. You have the military or the police posted on every street, on those streets, the ingress and egress. You might be saying that's China.
That's the United States.
This is the United States of America. And in every single one of those examples, it is happening in America. And it is unthinkable. Now, let's pause. I do believe that that we should take very seriously that we have a disease, a virus that does target people, certain people that have very poor immune systems, elderly, people who are sickly. Yes, without a doubt, and it is devastating. Not taking anything away from that. What we want to talk about, and this will be the rest of our conversation with this section here, is we want to talk about how dangerous we have seen the government literally take over every aspect of our life. And Chris, you talked about that you get in some pretty lively conversations about socialism. Even probably 4, 5, 6 months ago, if you and I got talking about socialism, we would be, oh, that'll never happen in America. I mean, yes, Joe, you guys are radical. Chris, you're being a little extreme. No, I understand Bernie Sanders, but who was going to really elect Uncle Bernie? I mean, it wasn't going to happen. But it seems like on the Democrat side, every time there was a debate, whether it be Elizabeth Warren or the mayor out of Indiana or Bernie or Uncle Joe or whoever it is, it seemed like they were all trying to outdo each other to be the most radical, leftist, socialistic ideas, progressive ideas. And let's just get it out in the open. When you hear the word progressive, you said words matter.
Yes.
Progressive. Oh, wouldn't we want to be progressive? That's kind of modern. It's kind of relevant for today. Progressive. What do you call progressivism, socialism, statism, collectivism? It's all the same. It is all the same. And what we want to bring to light is that what we're seeing right in front of our eyes is literally a socialist dream. And we want to talk about rebooting America. We want to talk about the fact that while as tragic as it is, at the time of this recording, it's tens of thousands, over 40,000. Soon it may be 50,000 people dead, many people infected. Not going to take anything away from how tragic that is. However, currently there are millions that are out of work. In the last month, the United States economy, which was absolutely cooking and on fire, and policies of good common sense policies, love them or hate them, Donald Trump has initiated so many policies that literally ignited the free market in the United States. And we're not here to promote Donald Trump. We're here to talk about free enterprise and capitalism and free market, self-determination, limited government. That's what we want to talk about. But you think about this in the last month plus maybe 6 weeks, about a third of our economy, it's approaching a third of our economy has been wiped out. Don't be deceived about what's happened to Wall Street. It's Main Street that I'm most concerned about. It is that suburban small business owner. It is the mom and pop restaurants. It is the men and women in the service industry. It is entire businesses wiped out, probably forever. It is devastating, and there are millions of livelihoods. While they might not be dead from the COVID-19, they're certainly dead economically. And we believe strongly that the free market will be the provider of the answers and the solutions. Mark my words, we are going to figure out ways. America is going to figure out ways with our scientists, our researchers, our people in the private industry. You empower private industry, the creativity in the free market. We will come up with vaccines. We will, just like polio and just like many other diseases, We have figured out a way to eradicate it. It will happen again. I am convinced at it. But at what cost? At what cost? The livelihoods of millions and millions and millions of small business owners, of middle class America, of service providers, gone, wiped out. What is the carnage of that? And what we advocate is, rather than radical, draconian, heavy government solutions that try to protect people, I think there's common sense, responsible responses to this as we try to get back to work, get back to our life, and don't be deceived. There are common sense ways for people who are responsible to be able to interact with each other. I mean, just some of the very fundamentals of freedom and liberty. One is that our rights don't come from man and government, they come from God, number one. Two is that a respect of individual rights. I respect your rights. I could swing my arms all the way around, but my rights end. My freedom to swing my arms around ends when now I strike you in the nose, and vice versa. I respect your rights. I respect the fact that you can have opinions. I can respect your freedom to live as you want to live, until it now restricts my freedoms and takes away my rights. A free society is built upon the premise of a mutual respect, but also self-control, personal responsibility. I believe restaurants could open up. Absolutely. I believe factories could open up. I believe that those mom and pop businesses can open up again. Yes, take certain measures in this time so that we slow down the rate of the contagious virus spreading. I understand that, but I have concerns. I have concerns that we, the people, are losing power over our lives. And you may call it, you may say, but we have to do this, Joe. We have to give up some of our civil liberties because we need to be safe. Do I need to remind you of a quote from Benjamin Franklin? Those that can give up essential liberty to gain a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. Living in a free society, it does involve a degree of risk. There is a degree of danger, yes, because we're living our lives, not controlled by other people, and our habits, our behaviors, they do have ramifications. Why we talk so much about personal responsibility, about morality, about the fabric of our religious foundations. Who was it? It was John Adams that said, "We have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions, unbridled by morality and religion. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." I think that we are in a day of reckoning. This is a testing period for America. That we have voluntarily surrendered so much of our civil liberties to the government. Who's to say those civil liberties will never come back? How do you know they're going to come back? Remember, the government has the military. The government has the police. They have the weapons. Who's to say that there should be essential businesses versus non-essential? I live in Raleigh, North Carolina here. We have had, even right here in Raleigh, North Carolina, our governor, who issued a stay-at-home order like many of you in your states, and there's certain businesses that have been deemed essential, others non-essential. Who makes up those decisions?
Exactly. That's
When liquor stores and abortion clinics can be deemed essential, but churches are deemed non-essential, I have a problem with that. Right here in my county, the sheriff issued a decree that there will be no more licenses or gun registrations or applications until this is all over. And let me tell you, thank goodness for the people that said no. And they pushed back. And they got that reversed. One of my a hero of mine. His name is David Benham, down in Charlotte, North Carolina. A conservative activist, Christian. Recently, he was outside with 3 of his colleagues from his ministry, observing social distancing guidelines. Only 3, not 10. Now, there was a crowd that started forming because, why is that? Well, you got 10, 15, 20 squad cars showing up because David Benham and 3 other associates from his ministry was doing sidewalk ministry before girls would go into, which is a constitutionally protected activity. And he has a constitutionally protected ministry, a 501c3, social distancing observed, but still the police arrested David. Right here in Raleigh. There was a protest about a week ago, right outside the governor's mansion, downtown Raleigh, capital of North Carolina. Protesters with signs observing social distancing regulations, protesting against their businesses being shut down and their livelihoods being destroyed, appealing for some restraint of some of these orders, these controls, the shutdown orders, appealing to the governor, please let us go back to work. Our families, we're losing everything. Raleigh police comes in, arrests are made, and the only response that was, and it was put on social media, check it out for yourself, is protesting is non-essential. Who comes up with this stuff? Who determines this sort of thing? I have a problem with the Michigan governor. Michigan governor, very strict, stay at home, but also there's certain non-essential activities like lawn care is deemed non-essential. Like that's going to be a health risk. You guys mowing your yard. Okay? Construction, shut it down. Shut down the construction industry. Okay, how about this one, Chris? Fishing with a motor is prohibited. Something about the motor. You know, so you have to row or paddle to get out to your favorite fishing spot. You know, I'm thinking, you know, they're probably 6 feet apart from everybody else. Fishing with a motor. Buying seeds is listed as non-essential. What the heck is that? Family and friend gatherings. Unless it's your closest family, you are not allowed to visit mom and dad. You're not allowed to visit other family members. You know, I happen to believe that the human beings are pretty smart. When given a chance to make their own decisions, to be able to be responsible, I believe that they will make responsible decisions. Yes, when you've got a contagion, when you've got this pandemic, yes, you have to be responsible. It's probably not a good idea to maybe have visitation into a nursing home.
Yes.
All right, these are very vulnerable people. I get that. I want that to end very soon. But you see, the very premise of socialism is this: that you are not smart enough, capable enough, responsible enough to guide your own lives.
Yep.
That the individual is far less important as the collective. And therefore, because you're not capable of leading your own life, that we as the government will come in and guide your life and direct your life, and we'll use laws, or we'll make up our own laws or executive orders or emergency orders, because you're not capable to make good decisions. You are just you're a moron. You're not that smart, and you'll kill each other. You'll kill yourselves. Mayor Deborah Frank Finan of Champaign, Illinois, signed an executive order to give herself the power to ban the sale of guns and alcohol. She also gave herself the power to cut off access to natural gas, water, and electricity, and to take possession of private property and order temporary closing of businesses because she declared an emergency. At the time of the order, there were zero confirmed COVID cases in her own municipality. Zero confirmed at the time of her order. And the city has around 87,000 people in it. She also, in her order, prohibited ingress or egress to and from this city. I make the case that the cure is worse than the disease. And what we're seeing here is a test run,
Yes.
Chris, of what socialism would look like. And now, no longer are you and me and some of our colleagues crackpots, we're not going to have socialism. Of course not. This is the United States of America. We're seeing it firsthand. We're locked in our homes,
Yes.
more or less. You came down covertly last night from Washington, D.C. We're stuck in our homes.
Mm-hmm.
Our businesses are shut. At least non-essential businesses are shut. We can't go and make a livelihood. Transportation is curtailed. The entire airline industry is a mess. The government is handing out checks, and they got to hand out more checks because they've already run out of that money, and they're going to hand out more checks. We have politicians in Washington, D.C. playing politics up there, arguing over helping out small businesses or not. It's disgusting.
Yeah.
I hate it. It is reprehensible. You're right. And I say, unfortunately, we the people have allowed it to happen.
Yes.
And I say that this is a day of reckoning. The day of reckoning meaning, how serious are you about those things that you say you believe in? How serious? When they come knocking, or when somebody sees you walking on a beach all by yourself and they want to come to arrest you. When you want to walk your dog and you could be arrested. When You're trying to open up a business, your family business that have been in business for 20 years, just because you have no more money left and you're trying to be responsible, but the mayor shuts you down. In a city of New York, Mayor de Blasio, you ever heard of him?
Yeah, I'm slightly familiar with them.
Promoting snitching on your neighbors.
Same in Los Angeles.
Los Angeles, they went one step further. They actually have, what did it call them? Business ambassadors.
Yes.
These are people employed by the city that go out in the city and look for businesses that are violating the orders of the government. And the first pass, it was over 900 businesses were cited. Already close to 500 of them were shut down. In New York City, text this number, take a picture of people that are violating the orders, snitching on your neighbors. You might say, come on, Joe, that only happens in China. Oh, that did happen in China. No question about it. It's happening right here in the United States of America. Did you ever hear about this? Do you know that there's a way to boil a frog?
Yeah. Slowly.
If you tried to throw a frog into boiling water, frog will jump right out. There's no way. It's impossible. But you want to boil a frog? Put them in a pot of cold water and slowly turn up the heat. We the people have allowed this. We've been allowing this for a couple of generations now. Easy.
Yes.
A slow degradation of our liberties, our civil liberties, our rights. And why is this happening? Because people are uneducated.
Yes.
They just want to be safe. I mean, of course the government is right. When we're fed 24/7 for the last 6 weeks straight, fear from mainstream media, fear, bad, and everybody walks around in fear, and they literally surrender their civil liberties to the government for complete control over our lives. This is very dangerous. Chris?
It's an information thing, and as you know, the saying is that information is power. Although there's more truth to that, is it's not just information; it's knowing the context within information, is being able to turn that into wisdom and knowledge. That's when you have real power. But a lot of people are not aware, because once again, the mainstream media, or people mainstream, lamestream, I think it's the same thing. They're out there giving information, but they're not giving it in context. So there's a lot of people who believe that this is only happening in their town. They don't understand this is happening nationwide. The fear that the media is breeding is like the death toll, and they're saying, "Oh, this number of people have died." And listen, that's a touchy thing to get into, because if you know someone who's lost a loved one, people will get emotional about it. But I think numbers matter, just like words matter. Numbers matter, especially when they're in their proper context. When we realize, my wife and I got married during the swine flu epidemic, right, and that affected millions of Americans. But we actually traveled overseas and had a destination wedding during the swine flu. We didn't shut down the United States economy during the swine flu, even though that affected millions of people and actually killed tens of thousands of people. But we had that information. We took proper precautions. We got on the airplane. We had our face masks. We took the proper precautions, and we went on about our lives. And we don't need government to tell us to control our lives. Because what's happening is that government is actually arbitrarily picking winners and losers. Everybody thinks about the Fortune 500 companies, right? But the 23, or at least it was 22 or 23 trillion dollar economy that we had prior to all this, about a quarter of it is small businesses. And you know what? Small businesses, by and large, you'll find a large percentage of minorities and different ethnic groups who are small business owners. They came here, they didn't come here to get a job. They came here to own the fruits of their labor, to be able to determine their own life. And so you can have a shop owner who sells, widgets, whatever it might be, and the government is telling that shop owner, who might be Korean, right? Who might be Asian, who might some sort of Asian, black, whatever like that, because we can look in. I was talking to a friend of mine who is part of an Asian community, and they were talking about small businesses and their entrepreneurs. Chicago is a perfect example. This whole movement by government has crushed the Korean community in Chicago because their businesses are, they own dry cleaners, restaurants, all these things, and the government has said your business is not essential, you're shut down. But yet, some of the things that these small business owners sell in their shop, you can go to Target and buy. So you're telling me that I can go and patronize Target, but I can't patronize the mom and pop business? That's just wrong. And then you have there was a big thing about Obamacare a few years ago, and we realized that Obamacare was essentially a government takeover of the medical industry. And there's a difference between health care and health coverage, but we were incensed about the idea that government was going to tell us what we could or could not have. I mean, or who was going to pay for it. At the end of the day, what you have is that you can go out there and pay a doctor to perform whatever surgery or whatever procedures you want. The only question is, if you had health care, is whether or not your insurance company was going to pay for it. But see, we realized that with government, they were going to take over everything and decide whether you could even have that surgery. This was a big issue back in 2008, 2009 during Obamacare, but guess what? We're revisiting that now with COVID because now government is telling. I had a friend of mine who's a nurse down in Florida, and she was just telling us that her doctor is probably going to go out of business because he does elective surgeries. Things like gallbladders, that you cannot have your gallbladder taken care of. Now, gallbladders can cause you tremendous pain, Joe, but they're telling you that unless it's a life or death situation, you can't have that doctor take your gallbladder. So you're telling me that I have to wait until I'm about to die to have a surgery. The question I have is, who are you to tell me when and where or how I can have a surgery? That's not your right. God did not give you that right. You don't have that authority. And so what we're realizing is that government is operating far outside of its authority. That we, the people, created our governments at the state, at the local level, the municipal level, and at the state level, and we empowered our states to create the Constitution, so the United States was there with limited powers, enumerated powers, to protect certain unalienable rights. That's all they're there for. But what we're seeing across the board, whether it's at the federal government level, and I'll say like this, thank God the current president is not encroaching on our rights as much as our local and state governments are doing. But they're doing it under the false pretense. They're doing it under the idea, as you said, that, people might die, therefore I'm going to shut off your Second Amendment rights. I'm going to shut off your First Amendment rights. I mean, it's all sooner or later, before you know it, how soon before they start trying to house troops in our homes? There's all those things that the founders and framers that we're talking about, that they had just gone through this Revolutionary War, and they said, you know what? We're going to make sure when we write these things out, we're going to make sure the government's not able to do these things, that we're limiting the power and scope of government. But once again, with Unhyphenated America, I want you to realize, people from different ethnic groups, you realize that this all is affecting these different minority groups disproportionately. Black-owned businesses. Many of the black-owned businesses might be small shops, hair salons, nail salons, barbershops. Ask yourself this question. When you turn on the news and the doomsayers are telling you how terrible things are, have you noticed that anchor person has a fresh haircut? So you're talking to somebody who, I go on TV. I've gone on CNN, Fox, Turkish radio and television, all that. And whenever I go on, they make me put makeup on. I hate putting makeup on, but they make me put makeup on. And if anybody else is there, they'll fix your hair. They'll do all that. I guarantee you right now that at all these different TV stations, whether it's your local TV station or any of the majors, that they still have their hair and makeup people. So why is it that they can have hair and makeup people, but your local barber can't function? Why is it that the mayor of Chicago, after telling everybody you need to stay home and there's certain businesses that are not essential, why is it the next day she showed up with a fresh haircut? See, these are the problems that people, they used to say, oh, well, you're a conspiracy theorist and so on and so forth. And I always rejected that title. And I actually have tried to stay more on principles and not getting caught up in wild-eyed theories based, focusing on the truths, focusing on the examples. Here's what's happened before. Here's what's happened in these countries. We're seeing it happen now. This is unassailable truth. These exact same things that happened in China, that happened in Cuba, that happened in Venezuela, all these other countries, it's happened there, it's happening here. So what do we do about it? We need to make sure, at the very least, we show up at the ballot box in November.
Chris, as we start winding this up, and this is really good conversation, it's very relevant to today. I do know this. I love a quote by Thomas Jefferson. He said, "The national progress of things is for liberty to yield and government to gain ground." That's the natural progression of things. That's a natural order of things. You mentioned a call to action.
Yes.
I really do believe that we should hold our elected leaders accountable. We should challenge them. And yes, protest.
Yes.
That is a constitutionally protected action that we have at our disposal, and I will not yield that right. I do believe in holding our leaders accountable. Look, there are elections coming up this fall. I'm going to make a prediction. At the time we're making this, it is still April. I'm going to make a prediction that there are going to be many chorus of voices that are going to be pushing hard for election voting by mail.
Yes.
Mark my words, you're going to hear that more and more and more. My goodness, we need to be safe. We need to protect every vote. We need to make sure every voice is heard. I believe that the left really wants this. Mm-hmm. I believe that this is just a feeding ground for election fraud.
Well, Joe, I can't remember if it was Lenin or Stalin who said that, who basically said that it matters not who votes, it's who counts the votes. And when you have mail-in ballots, if they're trying to prevent you from showing up and it's only mail-in ballots, then you have to question who is counting the votes.
So I'm concerned about that, and be vigilant. And when I say hold our elected leaders, elected officials accountable, let me tell you, there are going to be town halls coming up, and we ought to show up. Now, of course, be respectful, yes, but we need to show up, and we need to hold our elected leaders accountable. There are emergency powers granted to federal, state, and local governments, but they're all supposed to be temporary. Every one of them. Call to action. I do believe we should hold our elected officials accountable.
Absolutely.
There are emergency powers that are constitutional, that federal, state, and local governments can use in time of emergency, but they're all supposed to be temporary. And we should really now start pushing back. There are reasonable, responsible ways for this economy to reboot, to open up businesses, to open up Main Street. Be smart, yes. Use creative ways to keep the virus from spreading. But it is time to do it. And we should absolutely hold those leaders accountable based upon our constitutional rights.
And if, Joe, if I can say, when do you think that should be? I believe sooner rather than later. I think May 1st is a great date to start rebooting America.
It should happen. It should happen as soon as possible. May 1st, I would expect it. It needs to happen. It should have happened 2 weeks ago,
Yes.
honestly, because while there are hot spots in this country, I'm going to cite New York City as one of them. There are some governors that have absolutely pushed back against the pressure to shut down a state. The governor from South Dakota, excellent. She pushed back. While she has one hot spot there in a pulp processing
Yes.
facility, but it's contained. But they didn't sacrifice the whole state.
Absolutely.
Because of one concern. I believe her motives are right. She believes when we give in and sacrifice our civil liberties, we are now setting in motion something we never get them back. It is about our rights and our liberties. I believe socialism is absolutely an American dream killer. I absolutely believe that. So unchecked, and this is our call to action, unchecked, where does all this lead? Does this lead to nationalizing the banks? Does this lead to nationalizing companies and factories? Does this lead to nationalizing our healthcare system? Does this lead to nationalizing the pharmaceutical part of our economy? Does this lead to nationalizing our food distribution? Does this lead to nationalizing our transportation? I prefer the free market to be able to create solutions. I have faith in the free market. I believe in private enterprise, the ingenuity of the American system of scientists and engineers and research scientists. I believe in it. Chris, we are going to get through this COVID-19.
Absolutely.
We are going to do it in a better manner than everybody else. I'm convinced of it. But what I'm concerned about is the carnage to our civil liberties once this is passed. And it is time for patriots. It's time for us as constitutionalists to now hold our leaders accountable. And when we go to the ballot box in the fall, we should absolutely do it with a clear mind and with an educated mind, not voting based upon our demographics, our previous habits of voting. No, we vote based upon intelligent decisions, based upon what we want, which Chris spoke about very well earlier. What is it that you really want? Do you want dependency or do you want self-determination? I believe you should be rewarded for your efforts. I believe you should have the freedom to succeed and you should have the freedom to fail. I believe that we should have an economic system, a free market that promotes competition, which makes us all better. I believe that we should promote the free market system, which says even if you don't succeed and you fail, that you use that as a learning lesson and you come back better. You're more equipped. You learn some skill sets. That experience is going to work to your advantage. This is our economic system.
Well, Joe, but just to add to that, speaking to people, especially those who are in minority groups, especially those who are immigrants or first generation, you have to ask yourself, did you leave your home country, let alone your home continent, to come to the United States so that you could have guarantees or so you could come and have opportunity? Did you come here for freedom? Because if you came here for freedom, we're calling for you to stand up to protect that. That these are rights, like I said, it's not passed down through the bloodstream. You have to be willing to stand up and protect that. We're not calling for you to take up arms. Luckily, we can still protect it at the ballot box. So we're calling you to stand up and protect that. Protect what you came here for, that opportunity. And protect what your parents came here for you to have opportunity. All those things that Joe was talking about, that's what your parents, that's what you came here for. And it's something that's not available anywhere else. And I always love that quote from Ronald Reagan, who said he talked about talking to a gentleman from Cuba, and he said that at least when you escaped Cuba, you had a place to come to. If we lose these liberties here, where else can we run, Joe?
Yeah. A free people is a more prosperous people. A free people are healthier people. A freer people are more optimistic and hopeful. We have something to pass on down to the next generation. The American dream is all about self-determination. That you should be rewarded for your efforts, your hard work, and you should not be crushed if you fail. Let me tell you, if I fail, you know what? I will learn it or use it as a learning lesson. My experience is my value. But what I am pushing back on is it's somebody else determining the winners and the losers. I'm pushing it back against the weight of government that comes in and now tells me whether or not I can succeed, or if I succeed, that it really wasn't based upon my efforts alone, but really the government and other people, you owe them something. I'm not a fan of that. I believe in self-determination. I believe you should be rewarded for hard work and sacrifice. This is what I want to get back to with Chris Harris here and Unhyphenated America. I'm very proud of what he's doing. He's courageous. He is speaking truth to power, and he's doing it despite a lot of resistance, a lot of threats, a risk to his family. He's doing that. Myself with Defender gear. I have already succeeded in business for myself. I've been blessed in this country. God has blessed us mightily. I feel compelled to make sure that the next generation still has those opportunities, no matter where you come from, ethnic background, the color of your skin, young or old, college educated or not, privileged or not. Let me tell you, we all have the United States of America. We have our Constitution, we have our liberties and our freedom, and they are worth fighting for. So for now, Chris Harris, Unhyphenated America, Joe Markowitz, Defender Gear. Look forward to the next time sharing with you.
God bless America.